On the 10th of October 1981, my life was ruined by people I had never met from a place I had never been. I was and I remain an Irish Guardsman. To serve my country and to represent the people of Ireland has been one of the greatest privileges of my life. It is something I hold dear to my heart and will fight against injustices and terrorism in whatever form it manifests. Paul Kavanagh is a terrorist and a child murderer. He has knowingly and willingly took the lives of innocent people and violently ripped families apart, inflicting immeasurable grief and heartache on them. He has no right to hold a position that makes policy and influences the teaching of children. He gave up this privilege the moment he took up arms against the security services and in particular civilians. He has shown no remorse for his cowardly actions and has the blood of his victims, including mine, on his hands. I will be there at every turn this man makes, and I will fight to ensure people recognise his face and are aware of the atrocities he committed. Hello and welcome to Forgotten Voices Media. Forgotten Voices Media on a Monday evening. And here at Forgotten Voices Media, what we aim to do is we aim to tell the stories, the real life stories of victims, not just here in Northern Ireland, but victims right around the United Kingdom, whether that be in England, Scotland, Wales, and in Northern Ireland. And just a few weeks ago, we told a story of a man that lost his father, a guy called David Kelly. And David Kelly lost his father, Patrick. Patrick was a serving member of the legitimate Irish Army, and he lost his life at the hands of the IRA. And, whenever we were speaking to David, what we really learned was that these people were no respecter of religion or, no matter where you were from, if you got in their way, they wanted to murder you. And that's just the way that it was. So tonight we've got a really good show lined up. We have, as usual, we have a co-host here. We have Kenny Donaldson from SEF, and also a man called John Radley. Now, John Radley, you heard myself narrating a piece from John Radley, really talking about the day in which that he was made a victim by people that he didn't know in a land that he had never ever visited. So John Radley, although that he was part of the British Army, well, John Radley was a completely innocent man who one day IRA terrorism was visited upon him, and it changed his life, I guess, for forever. So I would just like to bring in Kenny Donaldson at this point, and then what we would like to do is we want to get on with really telling the story of what happened on that day. So I'd like for you to welcome Kenny on screen. Kenny, welcome again to another Forgotten Voices Media Live on a Monday evening. And again, thank you for coming, Kenny. And also, I want to really thank you for reaching out and inviting John Radley on our screen, because, this story, Kenny, it has huge significance today. If you look at the media in the last few weeks, what you'll have noticed is this story was really, it was brought out of history, and it was brought out because that, I always say that we have people that they can't let things go. They can't let things blend into the background, and they can't cause the circumstances where their victims are not traumatized and re-traumatized again. And if you'd have seen what would happen in the media just in the last few weeks, what you will have noticed that there was a man that belongs to Sinn Féin, and a man called Kavanagh, who was put into, I guess, a leading role in the Education Authority. And Kenny, maybe you would just like to tell us a little bit about that, please.
Okay. Thank you, John. It's great to join you again this evening. I'm very privileged to be part of this programme tonight with John Radley, and with a guy who I have immense respect for. He's a large-in-life character, and you'll soon see that for yourselves. But in terms of matters in the last few weeks, in many ways, this is a recurrence of a re-traumatization that John experienced some years back, when it became known to him that Paul Kavanagh was operating as a special advisor to the then Deputy First Minister Martin McGuinness. At that point, there was a law introduced known as Anne's Law, introduced by Jim Allister, which meant that no longer could someone with a serious criminal conviction serve a minister in that way as a special advisor. So he lost his role at that particular time, and also it meant that Mary McCardle couldn't be appointed at that time either, in respect of all of that. So that was the first time that John was thrown into the midst of all of this again, having been the innocent victim, as you rightly said, John, of that terror attack in 1981. But then in more recent weeks, of course, Sinn Féin have put forward Paul Kavanagh to serve on the highly influential policy body of the Education Authority, something that's an obscenity, something that has been extremely badly received by innocent victims across the board. And it really is another instance of a poking in the eye situation, where it appears that Sinn Féin are not content to in any way try to move this place forward, that they continue to want to fight a war by different means. And in putting forward someone like Paul Kavanagh, they knew what the impact was going to be, and it was purposely done. But it's John and others like him who are the net pain of all of that. And we simply cannot have an instance where Paul Kavanagh or anyone of his nature is on that EA board. And I know we'll get into the detail later in the programme around what might be done in order to redress this issue.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kenny. And for the purpose of the live chat, I would just like to ask you, if you share this stream around, share it with your nearest and dearest, with your friends and family, in order that as many people gets to understand what it is that's happening right here, right now in the United Kingdom, and really, how unacceptable that things like this really are. And as this show unfolds, you will soon get to understand the gravity of this situation. So what I would like to do before that we bring John in, and we ask John a few questions, Kenny, is I would like to play a little clip of really what happened on that day in Chelsea in 1981.
Ebury Bridge Road, Chelsea, 10:30 this morning, just 48 hours after Saturday's carnage. Behind boarded windows, shopkeepers clear away the glass and defiantly proclaim themselves open for business as usual. They're the lucky ones. For some, like the 14 people still being treated in hospital for injuries sustained in the deadly hail of nails and bolts which sighed through the street when the bomb went off, life is far from usual. And for the grieving relatives of widow Nora Field, who died in the blast, it'll never be the same again. But for others, today was a time for reliving lucky escapes. The luckiest of all, perhaps, Trouble Agent Mike Richards. He was sitting at his desk just 10 feet away from where the bomb went off. Amongst the debris in his shattered office, a jagged chunk of the old laundry van in which the bomb was planted.
Boom, I heard if I can remember distinctly, there was a whoosh. Next thing I know, I was in the air, and I went from there, and I landed up just by the stairs there. And you could hear glass crackling all over the place.
Well, that was underneath the desk.
That was underneath my desk. So it was, you know, that's only one. My desk was just littered with glass all over the place.
How are you feeling today?
I'm still a bit shocked. I'm also a bit angry, quite frankly.
What do you feel about the people who did this?
They may have a bitch and whatever. I don't know the ins and outs of the problem, but to hurt innocent people like this, and they must have known. I mean, apparently they could see what they're doing. I mean, that isn't on. I mean, I am an Irish citizen myself. It doesn't exactly make me proud to be Irish, is it?
Mr. Richards and Mrs. Field were unintended victims, of course. The target had been the Irish guardsmen returning by coach to their barracks just a few yards away. There, this morning, pistol-touting sentries stood guard, while colleagues with rifles patrolled the grounds. Near the guardhouse could be seen special mirrors designed for looking under cars. Clearly, no one is taking any chances, and the one big question now is when and where might the bombers strike again.
So at this point, what I would like to do before that we introduce John into the conversation, I would like to take everyone that's watching and the people that's here on our screen through a succession of pictures, just really to get a feel for what it was that happened, the type of person that actually perpetrated that evil deed on that day. And firstly, I would like to pop up a picture of the man in question. And I do this because in the introduction that John gave, that I narrated, John had said that he wants people to know who Mr. Kavanagh is, and he wants people to see his face. So firstly, this is Paul Kavanagh. This is the man that planted a bomb in Chelsea in 1981. And as I take you through these pictures, you'll get to understand who it was that Mr. Paul Kavanagh was. So that's picture number one. Picture number two. Okay, so a teenager with a gun is jailed. A teenage Republican was jailed for 5 years in Belfast City today on an arms charge. Paul Kavanagh, 18, unemployed, of Cavendish Street, Belfast, arrested by an army patrol in the Falls Road area of the city last April, refused to recognise the court. A jury convicted him of having a .45 automatic pistol loaded with 2 rounds with intent to endanger life and having it in a public place. Prison warders had to drag him to his feet when the charges were put to him and told that Mr. Justice McGonigal, as a Republican, I refuse to recognise the jurisdiction of the court. Mr. Malachi Higgins, prosecuted, said Kavanagh was one of the 2 men spotted by a 4-man army patrol in Cavendish Street area on April the 9th. He was frisked and an army post, the pistol was found down the waistband of his trousers. There was 1 bullet in the breech and another magazine, and the safety catch was at the firing position. Now, I think that there's something of huge significance in this newspaper clipping. When Paul Kavanagh was 18, when he was stopped by a 4-man army patrol in Cavendish Street area on April the 9th. And you know what I'm going to say here, and it's something that we speak about a lot at Forgotten Voices Media, is you see the British Army, they came to Northern Ireland to serve and protect both sides of the community, to ensure that people didn't lose their lives. And what you'll see here in this little newspaper clip is that British Army personnel, they stopped Mr. Kavanagh when he was 18 years of age. He had a gun, and that gun was loaded, and that gun was ready for use. So right here within this newspaper clipping, we could assume, we could assess that the British Army actually saved lives on that day. Now, one wonders whose life that they saved. We can only speculate on that, but certainly that's the type of thing that the British Army done whenever they came here to Northern Ireland. Without fear or favour, they protected both sides of the community. And that's contrary to what, say, for example, that the terrorists would try to portray. And the terrorists are getting away with, and that's because the mainstream media often don't actually challenge them. So that's picture number 2. Picture number 3. Nora Field, 61 years old, civilian. John Patrick Breslin, 18 years old, Irish Catholic civilian. Nora Field, a widow from nearby council flats, was out shopping for her 92-year-old mother. She was chatting to a neighbour, Hazel Cole, and took the full force of a van bomb. She was killed almost instantly by a 6-inch nail. I'll say that again, by a 6-inch nail that pierced her heart. The bomb, 7 pounds of 6-inch nails, 6 pounds of nuts and bolts, were propelled by 30 pounds of gelignite that exploded inside a disguised laundry van. Now, at this point, what I want to do is I just want to go to one more picture, and then what we'll do is that we'll invite John Radley on our screen, and we'll begin to talk about John's experiences of that day. But just another picture before we do that. Flying glass fragments from Kavanagh's bomb also injured 2 children. 5 years old Paul Wilson and his 2 years old sister Kelly. And what you're seeing here is the scene of Paul Kavanagh's van bomb that murdered 2 civilians at Chelsea Barracks. Again, I'll come back here for a moment because this has huge significance in this case. And as we go on, you'll get to understand why. 2 children, 5 years old Paul Wilson and his 2-year-old sister Kelly, well, they were injured in that bomb. A bomb that had 6-inch nails in it. A bomb that had nuts and bolts in it. Just think about that for a moment. Just think of what type of people would put 6-inch nails in a bomb, would put nuts and bolts in a bomb. I've one more picture just to show you before that we move on. Just bear with me for a second, because I think that this is of huge significance. The van bomb was detonated by a command wire from a vantage point on the scaffolding that offered a clear view of civilians near the bomb. Think about that. There was someone on a scaffold nearby that detonated that bomb and could clearly see who was in the vicinity whenever they detonated that bomb. They would have seen that there was civilians, women, children within the vicinity. Now, I tell this story and I present this in such a way just to show you the mindset of Paul Kavanagh, the mindset of the man and the team that would plant this bomb, causing so much injury, killing an 18-year-old lad. An 18-year-old lad, coincidentally, who was an Irish Catholic. Kenny, it beggars belief, and we often see, stories just like this, and we often see that bombs planted in built-up areas. They're no respecter of people. They're no respecter of religion, and we've seen that so many times before. John, just before I bring you in, what I would like to do is that I would like to play another short video clip, and I think that this video clip is very, very significant. And then whenever this video clip comes over, what we'll do is we'll start talking to yourself, John, about what happened on that day. Now, this was another bomb that was in London, and this is a young girl, a very articulate young girl, actually explaining something that I think that has huge significance to what it is that we've just presented. So listen to this young lady.
They mustn't consider us as being Irish if they're prepared to make us victims of the sort of action that they've taken. I'd go so far as to say that I'd be very, very annoyed, very angry that they would call their action an action in the name of Irish people, because so many Irish people are shocked and horrified victims of such an action.
What way are they victims?
Well, they're victims in two ways. They can be victims of the actual atrocity. There are plenty of instances where people have been killed by bombs who they would argue they were trying to help. They can... the bombs don't discriminate between Irish, English or any other nationality. They'll just kill people. Full stop.
We may not have had audio for that clip. I mean, very sorry about that. And sometimes this happens with live feeds. John, you know, just looking at the circumstances surrounding what happened on that day. And John, I would like to just pick up with you. I mean, where were you on that day? I mean, were you traveling? Were you outside the base? If you could just set the scene and tell us in your words what happened on that day.
Yes, certainly. We were coming off the Tower of London Guard. So with the Tower of London being so far away from Chelsea Barracks, we had to get transport. We couldn't actually physically march back. However, the Buckingham Palace detachment, they actually were on the coach as well, because we call it a wet dismount. While it was raining, you have to get the transport back. You can't physically march back because the rain will ruin your equipment. As we got to the Newbury Bridge Road, luckily or unluckily for us, the lights changed in our favour. So we beat the Buckingham Palace detachment coach onto Newbury Bridge Road. The idea being is that we could get our weapons back into the armoury, we could get changed. And my brother was waiting for me. My brother also served in the Irish Guards, and we were going to go and watch Everton against West Ham. Obviously, that didn't happen. As we turned into Newbury Bridge Road and we passed this laundry van, the IRA had set it off by remote control. We're talking about nails and bolts. I don't know if you're aware, but what they'd actually done, somebody had taken the time to bend some of the 6-inch nails into boomerang shapes, so bent them in half. So when the explosion went, it was the idea that the nails would spin through the air and rip through people, causing as much injury and death as possible. So as we come and we passed the laundry van, obviously they set it off by remote control. So I was really badly injured. A 6-inch nail was buried across my head here, but luckily enough didn't penetrate my head, but it was embedded into my head. The top of my nose was hanging off. One of the officers who visited me in hospital said it was like looking at the top of a boiled egg. As you take the top of a boiled egg off, that was my nose. My face was smashed to pieces. I've got a concrete jaw in. I had the 6-inch nail, penetrated my neck, went through my body and got stuck halfway in and halfway out my back. But luckily enough for me, it didn't touch any of my vital organs. So I've been really, really fortunate. And then my left hand was up against my face. So obviously I'm on the coach coming back, and I've got metal in 3 fingers, wires in 3 fingers. I've lost the top of my little finger and I can't bend 2 of my joints. Not only that, I had a big charter glass went through my right eye, which has rendered me blind in my right eye. And the blast being so loud and me being next to it, my eardrum was completely shattered. Now, you can get a perforated eardrum, which is the size of a pinhole. However, my eardrum was obliterated. So St. Thomas's Hospital built up another eardrum for me, made up from membrane from inside my head. So I am extremely lucky to be here, and every day for me is a new start and a blessing, because other people obviously aren't here any longer.
You know, John, you tell that so eloquently, so you do. And, you know, whenever you would have seen what I just popped up there a moment ago, in terms of, and I'm looking for the proper picture. I'm just going to pop it up again here. Is the van bomb was detonated by a command wire from a vantage point on scaffolding that was had a clear view of the civilians near the bomb. John, have you any recollection of that day? And you know, what did you visualize around you? I mean, were you aware of people around the place or anything before the bomb went off?
No. What happened when you're coming off from a Queen's Guard? You don't get an awful lot of sleep. If the royal family are not in, your shift pattern is 2 hours on and 6 hours off. And obviously through these silent hours, people are getting ready to go on duty and coming back off duty. So your sleep pattern's really badly disturbed. So when you get the transport coming back, what you're trying to do is get a little bit of sleep. So and that's why. So my hand was up against the window of the coach, and my head was in my hand. So you don't actually see an awful lot. You're not aware of a lot of things outside. And one of the things that I think helped save lots of the injuries on the coach was our greatcoats were hanging up. Our capes were hanging up. So obviously that took a lot of the books. But when the blast happened, there was a big shockwave in the coach, and I can physically still see now the shockwave and the coach wobbling from the shockwave, and all the debris and the glass and everything flying inside. Now, obviously, this is all happening within a split second, but for me, time really stood still a little bit. So I can see the shockwave, I can see the debris, the glass, and everything flying, and then I don't know what it was, something through the side of the coach where I was sitting. And hit me full in the head. Now, the last thing I remember was two things. My head hitting my friend next to me, John Wallace. Now, John Wallace lost his eye. He actually physically lost his eye from the blast. And the last thing I remember thinking of was my wife is called Pat. And I was thinking, who's going to look after Pat? Because subconsciously, I must have thought I was dead, and I wasn't going to come around for that. So my last thought was, who's going to look after my wife? So you're not aware of the situation around you, you're not aware of outside. But obviously, being in the army, we're trained, and we're trained to look for command-wise. We're trained to look at vantage points and things like that. But you've got to bear in mind that we are in the heart of London, technically in peacetime. So the one thing you're not expecting is a bomb packed with explosives, nails, and bolts.
And for the purpose of the people that's listening here, I think it's important, John, that you would answer this question. But I mean, did I read it that the Irish Guards, they never served in the Northern Ireland conflict? Would that be true?
Not up until then. We have obviously done since, but we hadn't served in Northern Ireland till then. We do have a few guys that go in attachment with the Scots Guards and the Coldstream Guards, but you had to volunteer for that. You had to be vetted for that. Two of my friends, a couple of them that were in the regimental police with me, they'd been to Northern Ireland. But yeah, as a rule, we'd never served in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, Kenny, the more that I talk to people like John, what I find is that there's more and more people that we talk to that are totally innocent, have never done these terrorists any harm, and in no way, shape, or form have they ever done that, and yet these people take it upon themselves to go and plant bombs. And to literally, and to get at people who would seemingly be in the British Army. They don't care who it is that they murder and they maim in order to get one over, as I say, on the British Army. Kenny, you know more about these things than I do. I mean, you look at these type of cases regularly. Is this the type of thing that you find when you scratch the surface with more cases and more cases on a daily basis?
Absolutely, John. I suppose in Republican speak or Provo speak, they'll say that John was a legitimate target, is the term they'll use. And they'll say that Nora, and in terms of young Breslin, that they were collateral damage, and that the primary target was soldiers on that day. But they took a measured decision that if it meant that civilians also were to die, then so be it. And in so many situations, that has been the case over the years of the Troubles. They obviously have directly targeted civilians on other occasions as well for murder. So it's not a case that civilians were always the collateral damage. Civilians were sometimes the primary target. But as has been said, John was operating as a legitimate soldier of this state. He had no quarrel with Northern Ireland. He was performing his duties with honour and with, what he was meant to do. And those individuals, obviously, they set up an ASU in that vicinity of London. And They carried out a very systemic terror campaign over many years, and there are many innocents who were murdered and many others who were sadly either physically or psychologically traumatized by their actions. As John says, John is one of the survivors of all of that. His life has been very different because of what he has experienced. But I know John also feels very much for those whose lives were stolen away on that day, and indeed others, and the families that are left broken behind with all of that.
Yeah. Okay, so it happened in when was it? 1981. What month would it have been?
October. A couple of days after my birthday.
Okay, and I'm asking that for a reason, because we're going to pop up another picture here. So after the event and the injuries, the murder that had taken place on that day, I'll just pop this up and I'll read from it. So life 5 times over for IRA terrorists who grew up with murder in their hearts. And here we have a picture to the right-hand side of this newspaper clipping, where we have a bomber, Thomas Quigley, and bomber Paul Kavanagh. And just to read from the newspaper clipping, it says that 2 IRA bombers were who brought terror and death to the streets of London were each jailed for 5. So you got to excuse me, it's hard to read because it's so small. For life 5 times over yesterday. Thomas Quigley was found guilty of murdering 3 people. His bloody accomplice, Paul Kavanagh, had been convicted on Wednesday by an Old Bailey jury. The judge yesterday ordered that both men should be locked up for at least 35 years. The killers will both be aged 64 before they can be released. It was an inevitable end for the 2 murderers who hated the British even as schoolboys. And their heroes were the godfathers of terror in the IRA. And it was a proud day for them when they barely out of short trousers, they joined the IRA's youth wing. So without getting into the entire newspaper clipping here, the thrust of this is that they had been jailed really for, let's see, as I go down, they were jailed for life 5 times over yesterday, and they should serve a minimum of 35 years. Now, we understand and we recognise that under the terms of I would assume, the Good Friday Agreement, the peace deal, that these people would have had their release. Kenny, and at that point, I'd just like to go over to you, and can you tell the listeners what you know about that?
Yes, I can confirm that, John, that Paul Kavanagh was a beneficiary of those early release provisions. Early release provisions that, let's be frank about it, never required a convicted terrorist to ever express remorse, regret for what they had done, to in any way seek to put forward a pathway of restitution for their victim survivors. That didn't happen. Instead, what we did was we allowed these people out, and then many of them were elevated within our systems of government, and others were given the acceptability of being business people, of being educators within our school-based environments, of being people around the society that, to be honest, you'd almost swear that the time before it never ever happened. And that's a stain on British society. John fought for the values of liberty, of freedom, and of decency. Those values have been torn up, sadly, by our state. And having defeated the Provisional IRA and other forms of terrorism, the security and intelligence agencies, we now have a situation where the state, through its governance, has empowered those individuals to take up their positions within the governance of this place. They are now the establishment. How warped and sick is that? That action in 1981, if somebody was to say that particular year, that John Radley, the people who carried that out, would, in 40 years actually it is, to the year, would then be potentially sitting in a body which would discuss the education of our young people, you would have been told you're going crazy.
Yeah.
But yet that's happened.
Yeah. And John, just over to you here, and I'm going to ask you, I mean, what before we get into the fact that Mr. Kavanagh recently has been appointed to a body, a public body, and after all, we've just seen the type of Mr. Kavanagh and who he was, and how, as Kenny said there, that the man remains unrepentant, as does the people that surround him. I mean, what does it make you feel like whenever? I mean, let's take, say, for example, the peace process in Northern Ireland. I mean, many people that I talk to, they see it as kind of an appeasement process. How does it make you feel as a victim of Mr. Kavanagh to see that he was released under the terms of the Belfast Agreement early?
Okay, John. Well, let me say, I'm not just speaking for me here. I can speak for every single veteran, every single serving soldier, every single service personnel, all the families and all the victims that say it is a warped kind of justice where people are rewarded for murder, for bombing, and for inflicting injuries on innocent people. Yet the innocent people are, like, for example, for me, I'm farmed out on a pension, patted on the head, and forgotten all about. So it is really warped that we can reward murderers and terrorists with position, with title, and with money, and people who are injured, who are victims, basically get absolutely nothing. The Good Friday Agreement, for the most part, is a real good working piece of legislation. It worked. For the best part, it stopped the terrorism. But the British government went too far, and Kenny is exactly right. We appeased. We became subservient to Sinn Féin and to terrorists. We have the Queen, who's our Commander-in-Chief, and I respect immensely. And we have the Prime Minister of the day, David Cameron, apologising to Martin McGuinness and apologising for the British part in the Troubles. But like you quite rightly said, John, we are there, the British soldier is there as a peacekeeper, as much as the United Nations would be. We're there to hopefully keep two factions apart from tearing each other apart. Now, as a British soldier, I will fight anyone, I will fight any enemy, but those enemies, for the most part, are visible. And we can have a war, but these guys hide behind women and children. They hide behind the public. They use the public as collateral damage. And when you've got the IRA, who supposedly are Catholics, well, guess what? I'm a Roman Catholic. The IRA have killed nearly 2,000 Catholics. So I don't understand how they can murder their own people, their own countrymen, the people that breathe the same air, the people that see the same skies in Ireland, and then call it a legitimate conflict. It's anything but. So this government and the MOD, for my part, and the part of every single veteran who went on op banner, who some of them are now still being pursued through the courts 40 years after, doing the legitimate, legal, lawful duties to help keep peace in Northern Ireland. I think for me and for a lot of people, it is a skewed type of system that we've got.
Yeah, definitely. Again, this is for the purpose of understanding for the people that is watching now and the people that will come along to watch later. And I guess, John, something that you just said, I mean, this wasn't planned, but I would like to play, it's a song about the British Army. And in this song, there's raw footage of what was happening, where angry mobs were getting around British soldiers, and try to understand, and this is for me, appealing to the people that is watching, but try to understand what it was that young British soldiers were up against whenever they were in Northern Ireland. And, sometimes things went wrong. We're not here to say that things didn't go wrong when soldiers were here in Northern Ireland, but just try to put yourselves in the shoes of the soldier whenever he was here and doing a job, as I said, to protect both sides of the community without fear or favour. Just watch this.
In the station in the city, a British soldier stood. shilling and enlisted on the road. But there was no fear of fighting, the empire long was lost. Just 10 years in the army, getting paid for being bossed. Then leave a man experienced, a man who's made the grade, a medal and a pension, some memories and a trade. Then came the call to Ireland as the call had come before. Another bloody chapter in an endless civil war. The priests, they stood on both sides, the priests, they stood behind. Another fight in Jesus' name, the blind against the blind. The soldiers stood between them, between the whistling stones, and then the broken bottles that led to broken bones. The petrol bombs that burned his hands, the nails that pierced his skin, and wished that he had stayed at home, surrounded by his kin. The station filled with people, the soldier soon was bored. But better in the station than where the people warred. The room filled up with mothers, with daughters and with sons, who stared with itchy fingers at the soldier and his guns. A yell of fear, a screech of brakes, a shattering of glass. The window of the station broke to let the package pass. A scream came from the mothers as they ran towards the door, dragging children crying from the bomb upon the floor. The soldier stood and could not move, his gun he could not use. He knew the bomb had seconds and not minutes on the fuse. He could not run to pick it up and throw it in the street. There were far too many people there, too many running feet. Take cover, yelled the soldier, take cover for your lives. And the Irishmen threw down their young and stood before their wives. They turned towards the soldier, their eyes alive with fear. For God's sake, save our children, or they'll end the short lives here. The soldier moved towards the bomb, his stomach like a stone. Why was this his battle, God? Why was he alone? He lay down on the package and he murmured one farewell to those at home in England, to those he loved so well. He saw the sights of summer, felt the wind upon his brow. The young girls in the city parks, how precious were they now? The soaring of the swallow, the beauty of the swan, the music of the turning earth, so soon would it be gone. A muffled soft explosion and the room began to quake. The soldier blown across the floor, his blood a crimson lake. They never heard him cry or shout, they never heard him moan. And they turned their children's faces from the blood and from the bone. The crowd outside soon gathered and the ambulances came to carry off the body of a pawn lost to the game. And the crowd, they clapped and jeered and they sang their rebel songs. One soldier less to interfere where he did not belong. But will the children growing up learn at their mother's knee the story of the soldier who bought their liberty, who used his youthful body as the means towards the end, who gave his life to those who called him murderer, not friend?
So, you know, for those that watched that clip there, what they would have noticed is they would have noticed several scenes where British Army soldiers were surrounded by huge mobs. And, you know, I don't know whether you noticed or not, but I mean, there was a Land Rover and they were trying to rock it over and, you know, the windows were broken. And if, you know, the crowds far outnumbered the soldiers, and the soldiers with much restraint on those days. I mean, that was typical of Northern Ireland. The soldiers with much restraint, what they did was that they, you know, they backed off, they withdrew. And yes, sometimes things went wrong. And, you know, if you look at scenes like that, you could only imagine why things went wrong. And I would just like to add to that is that whilst those people They were sent out to rat and to cause this mayhem. Skulking in the background was snipers.
Yeah, of course.
Shooting at the soldiers. So I'm trying to say this in order that people understand that people they put themselves in huge danger in order to come to Northern Ireland, to place themselves between warring factions, in order to serve and protect the entire community of Northern Ireland. And as I say, without fear or favour. And then we go back to you again, John, here, where these people, they decide to have a bombing campaign in England because they wanted to, cause mayhem in England. And this is what happens. And isn't it interesting in your case that the first man that was speaking, I mean, he was also an Irishman who, I think it was a travel agency that he was in. Yeah. And, he was a victim of that bomb, as was the 18-year-old young lad. And again, John, yourself, again, who, you were a Catholic yourself. So those bombs and those people respected, they didn't care whether it was Catholics, Protestants, or whoever it was, in order to have their wicked way. Yeah. So, John, before we move on to Paul Kavanagh, the man, and what has happened today, I would like again just to pop up another little picture on the screen, and what I'll do is I'll read from it. So in the last clip, you've seen a newspaper clip, and what you would have seen is that that they were sentenced to 35 years for carrying out these attacks. Now, this was a co-accused of Paul Kavanagh, and I'll just read from this. So is it Natalino Vela? This is me trying to pronounce. A co-defendant of Kavanagh told police that Kavanagh had also bombed Harrods shoppers shortly before Christmas in an attack that murdered 6 victims, 3 civilians, one of them an American citizen. Now, I must point out that we have no way of telling that to be the case, but that was a co-accused who had actually given that information to the police around the time. So, Chelsea seemingly wasn't the only thing that Mr. Kavanagh was involved in. And, Kenny, these people, as you've seen, if you look for Mr. Kavanagh from the age of 18, he was intent on causing harm, and he went on to have a huge career in murdering people just because that they thought that they were, I guess, they often say that they were trying to free Ireland. Well, I asked the question, were they freeing Ireland one Irish person at a time, by killing one Irish person at a time, by planting their bombs in a way and, shooting their bullets in a way that they didn't care who those bullets hit or who those bombs actually blew up? Kenny, over to you.
I suppose, as you say, John, it's unfathomable sometimes whenever you do actually deeply think about it, because I think the troubles why they're so painful in many ways, these years on from it, is because of the intimate nature of those troubles. The two islands of Ireland and Britain have a huge history and an interconnected history. And as John would quite rightly know, that the part of the world where he originates, in terms of the prominence of the Irish community within the Liverpool, broad Liverpool area, from all backgrounds, from Protestant and Roman Catholic, there's a huge crossover between people. But the point that we also need to be very mindful of and clear of is that there weren't thousands upon thousands of terrorists who were actually the front people in terms of the detonation of bombs and the pulling of triggers. No, it was a very small, relatively small grouping of people who did that. And that's the nature of terrorism, that they have to keep things very close. They have to almost view each other as blood brothers, that there's a level of assurance in who is within their particular team. And of course, against all of that, we all know how successful in many ways the security forces and intelligence agencies were in terms of infiltrating those close networks. They weren't impenetrable. And ultimately, that's what brought the Provisional IRA to the negotiating table. But sadly, behind all of those frontline killers in both republicanism and loyalism, there is sadly a network of others. There are people who finance for them. There are people who are spotters. There are people who collude in the cover-up of operations. And there's people who hold safe houses and who held them over the years. There's people within the church and other organs of our state who actually gave a level of credibility and credence to what was being done. So this unfortunate nature of terrorism is that there's then a back support, and it's that support which enables terrorism to continue. Because if it didn't exist, it wouldn't be able to move and to exist in a vacuum. It requires that other support. And for my money, anybody who was involved in that action is ultimately also responsible for the mayhem that has been caused. They may not have pulled the trigger, but they enabled others to do so. And that's something that needs to be brought out more.
Yeah. Now, what I would like to do at this point is that, again, I would like to appeal to the live chat. Please leave some messages of support and welcome for John. I mean, last week we done a stream with some victims of the Ballygolly bus bombing, and I have to say I was overwhelmed, and I'm sure as were the people that came to our stream. They were very overwhelmed by the messages of support for what it is that you're doing. And John, you're very brave to come on here to tell your story and to try to tell your story in order that other people would stop and would look. I'm sorry, I'm just going to bear with me. I have to actually just George Russell, if you stop sending stuff to the screen here. There we go. So anyway, telling your story in a way that ordinary people understand that. Look, here's how we're going to say this here, and I'm going to pop up a picture on the screen. Is that can these people not go away? Can these people not get on with their politics? Can these people not get on with their lives? Can these people not get on with their lives in a way that they stop traumatizing, re-traumatizing their victims? Because, as you had said at the start there, Kenny, and we've often talked about this, is that they do this in a calculated way. And I would like to take people down a line where what we try to do is we try to show that this is exactly what these people do on a daily basis here in Northern Ireland and right around the United Kingdom. What they do is they're waging psychological warfare on their victims. And I know that there's some people here on the stream tonight that is watching, people in high authority, and I would appeal to those people, if they could even appeal to the Irish government, because the Irish government seem to be responsible for these people. That the Irish government could ask them, could shame them into just literally stopping, toning it down and turning it off in terms of how it is that they continue to re-traumatize their victims without any shame, I would add. So I'm going to pop up a picture here, and then I'll lead to another picture, and then I would like to go to you, John, on the back of this, just to give me your thoughts on how that this is happening, and then your experience on how that it is that you've been re-traumatized. So, first picture. This is a picture of a sitting MP's office, a man called Chris Hazard. It's in Castlewellan in County Down. What you'll notice on the sign, this office has on the sign the McNulty and the Megorian Advice Centre. Now, that is an MP. McNulty and Megorian are two dead IRA terrorists. This MP's office, any MP's office, any politician's office, it should be open and inviting to the entire community, because Chris Hazard is an MP for the entire community. There's many people from the British Unionist community that lives in and around that area. And MPs' offices should be, open, that people could walk in and people could have things dealt with. Now, I'm going to actually point something out here. There's a man called Sammy Heenan that lives 5 miles away. And Sammy Heenan was orphaned by the IRA at the age of 11 when one morning, he heard loud bangs, and he went out into the farmyard and he found his dad lying on a pool of blood. Now, the IRA give reasons for shooting Sammy Heenan's dad, but the reasons were actually wrong. It was a case of, mistaken identity. And yet Sammy Heenan has to be passing that office, has to be living near that office, has to be traumatized and re-traumatized by the memory of his father. And when he sees that, he tells me that traumatizes him regularly. Now, again, I would just like to pop up another picture, and this is for the purpose of me explaining to people how it is that these people are traumatizing and re-traumatizing their victims. Now, again, on the theme of children, and this is what we'll be leading to very shortly with Mr. Kavanagh in the position that he's in today. This is a picture not far from where Chris Hazard's office is, down the same road in Castlewellan. On the stone here, you'll see that it says the Paul McGorian Park. Now, just left of the stone, there's a primary school. Behind the primary school, there is a play park, and the play park is named after Paul McGorian. I just up this lane, doing the homework on it, we have found that Mr. Paul McGorian, he was on active service with the IRA, and British Army shot him. He had a rifle. And they have named this play park after Paul McGorian, a terrorist who was out to murder people. Now, again, I ask the question, should a play park ever be named after a terrorist? Someone that was going out with murder in mind? Should an MP's office ever be named after terrorists? I just wonder, who it was that done an equality impact assessment on putting that sign on that office. I mean, was that likely to cause offence within the community? And again, I say this because I know that there are people that are watching tonight, people in power. And, I would appeal to those people to even talk to the Irish government to see, is there a way in which this could be toned down in order that people like Sammy Heenan, people like John, people like many other people that we've had on our screen, that they're not constantly reminded of what happened to them, why they were made victims, why they lost their loved ones. These people, they have no shame, Kenny. They really have no shame. John, over to you. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it's quite a strange anomaly that this would only happen in Northern Ireland. It would not happen in any other part of the world, because in any other part of the world, it's not acceptable. So I don't understand how our government and the Irish government think that it's acceptable to have an MP have his building named after 2 IRA terrorists. Where Paul Kavanagh's concerned and where the IRA terrorists concerned, people say that we should move on, that we should forget the past. And I would counteract that argument and say, well, look, we can't move on and forget the past. The past will always be there. But what the IRA and Sinn Féin are trying to do, they're trying to rewrite the past. They're trying to rewrite history. They're trying to change history to fit their narrative, that they were instigators of the peace process, when they actually weren't. They weren't instigators. They are, at the end of the day, a terrorist is a terrorist. A murderer is a murderer. And for me, you would never let Ian Huntley out of prison and say, go and look after children, go and write policy for children. So why is this guy being remembered in a park where children play? He committed murder. He is a terrorist. He hid in the shadows and he killed innocent people. So there's no way that it can't be acceptable that anybody, any terrorist, any murderer can have anything named after them ever. A better idea would be name it after me.
Yeah. And back over to, and again, I'll further and I'll move on to Kenny here for Kenny's views on this. But we done some research, and what we found is that Paul Magorian Park, it was funded by Newry and Mourne Council, by taxpayer money, and also by the Irish language school that was there. They had an input into putting that park together. And then Kenny, Kenny, there was another park of huge significance not too far away, and it was named after another terrorist. And again, it was funded by exactly the same council. Would you just like to tell our listeners about that?
Yes, John. We speak, of course, of the Raymond McCreish Park. Raymond McCreish was one of those hunger strikers who completed suicide, is all you can say. In terms of that particular issue, that was extremely divisive. And in a park in the middle of Newry, a city within the United Kingdom, it was able to happen that a park could be financed by taxpayers' monies in order to remember someone whom again was convicted of very serious terrorist offences. So it's sometimes you really have to scratch yourself or to pinch yourself just to think how crazy this has all got. And the problem is it's systemic within our society. So we're showing a couple of examples tonight. That's merely a couple of examples. We have circumstances where, let's be frank and honest, right across the board, there are band parades on occasions are named after loyalist terrorists. There are grounds named after Republican terrorists, which supposedly are about sport within the Gaelic Athletic Association. Right across our society at all levels, there's been this move to normalise these issues. And all I think we need to make the point as well is that what happened to John in 1981 is not the past, it's John's present. It's the rest of society's past, because they want it behind. They want to focus on what happens here on in. So Paul Kavanagh and colleagues stopping murdering was enough for the rest of society. And they got patted on the back for it when they stopped murdering. But of course, for innocent victims, they seek accountability. They seek an ongoing restitution and a willingness on the part of them that have done what they've done, that they would not goad, that they would not seek to rub salt into the wounds. Because this can happen at any point in time. John doesn't know when the next time might come, where he will again be thrown into the midst of the media and have to speak on these issues. It's not something that he courts or that he wants. John doesn't speak week on week in the media about any other issue. It's about the issue that connects directly to his own life. But he's powerless in not knowing when this could come and bite him once again. And so many others are in the same boat.
Yeah. And before we move on to talk a little bit about Mr. Kavanagh and the position that he has recently got, again, which beggars belief, what I would like to do here is that, again, just the way that things have flowed, I feel the need to play a man that we had on our screen just a few weeks ago. And I would just like for you to listen to this man, a guy called Shane Lavery, and just listen to Shane and how it is that Shane speaks of being re-traumatized and really, in despair of how things are progressing and how that young people are still being indoctrinated into the same ways, coincidentally, that Mr. Kavanagh was indoctrinated into by exactly the same organisation.
Robert, being Robert, he was a person, he liked to help people. He was a kind soul, and he decided he was going to leave Monsanto and go into the RUC. So Robert went off in 1972, and Robert trained in Enniskillen, and then was stationed in Glenravel Street in North Belfast. Sadly for us, on the 15th, going into the 16th of July in 1972, I remember on a Sunday morning. I was lying. It was a sunny day. The sun was coming through the crack in the curtains, and my sister came into the room, and she went over to my big brother Terry, who was sleeping in the other bed, and I heard her whispering in his ear, "Terry," and she was crying. And I was 10. As soon as I heard the words, "It's Robert, he's been shot," it was awful, and the tears flowed, and it was an emotional, absolute roller coaster and nightmare from then on. It was an incident was phoned in on a forecourt of a garage. There had been some sort of a break-in. Our alarm had gone off, and they needed the police to visit. Now, if you think about that one thing on its own, those guys were going out not to visit any harm in anybody. They were going out to help people in a nationalist area. And Robert volunteered. He was off duty. He volunteered to get into that police car, and he was in the back seat. So they went to the place where the alleged incident had happened, and there was an ambush set up there. And when Robert's patrol car came past, they opened up, and Robert was sitting in the middle of the back seat, and he was shot. He went unconscious, and he didn't regain consciousness, and that was it. He passed away. As a 10-year-old in the town, I can remember shortly after the incident happened, we had to get extra security on our house because some people took it upon themselves to come and shout obscenities. It wasn't easy for a 10-year-old to look at that and to, just get on with things. I suppose my life took a different direction at that time, but because of the way my mum was affected by Robert's murder, she wouldn't countenance me going to either of the schools like Dalriada or Coleraine Inst, which meant a bus journey. She had already lost a son, and she was so fearful that she was going to potentially lose another. Those things had a huge impact. It changed the way our dynamic was, and certainly it changed my mum's life forever. She never got over it. However, what it didn't do, it didn't encourage her to encourage us any feeling that we should go out and do the same on our neighbours in the nationalist community. It makes me very, very sad whenever I see things like the funeral that we see on TV just yesterday, and I see young people who didn't live through the Troubles, young guys who are walking side by side at a coffin of a man who's in his 60s, the old brigade now, and those young men are being indoctrinated with this warped vision. So a question I would ask is why is it always pushed into the minds of these young people to continue on where the previous heroes have left off? Heroes I use in inverted commas.
And I think before we move on, this is the point where what we do is that we pop up another picture on our screen, and we begin to ask a real question, and we begin to, I guess, lay things out bare in a way that people in authority, they understand that John Radley, he doesn't want hassle in his life. He wants to get on with his life. People like Shane, they don't want hassle in their lives. They want to get on with their lives. You hear Shane say that he's in despair when he sees that young people are walking alongside a coffin of a man in his 60s. These young people weren't even born when the terrorists, whenever they went into their ceasefire in 1994. But yet these young people are being indoctrinated into this Republican way of life, and they continue to mold and make their community in a way that is totally detrimental to young people's minds. And in fact, I would go further, and I would say that in a way that they're poisoning those young people's minds. So I would just like to pop up another picture here, and then we'll move on with what we're here for, and that's to talk about Mr. Kavanagh and the position that he holds today. But have a look at this picture, and I'm going to just narrate over it. Okay, so yesterday in the Sunday Times, we see that Micheál Martin, the existing Taoiseach, the current Taoiseach in the Irish Republic, where he has said here that Sinn Féin needs to apologise for IRA, warns Micheál Martin. Now, if you were to read the piece in the Times yesterday, well, you know, he was really suggesting that Sinn Féin needed to tone down the way that they are doing things. And again, I think that he was aiming at the fact that they continue to glorify terrorism, as you've seen with Chris Hazard's office. And you know, that's against the law right now in the United Kingdom. That's against the law in Ireland. That's against the law right across the Western world to glorify terrorism. But these people, seemingly, they can do this. Are they above the law in the way that they do things? So again, Micheál Martin yesterday was asking them to tone it down. And again, I'm appealing to the people on here, the people in authority that are watching this screen, that will come along to watch this screen. And you know, I've no doubt that we have people even associated with the Irish government that would watch this. And I would appeal to Micheál Martin, anybody in authority in you know, the Irish dial right now. Why don't you come on Forgotten Voices Media? Why don't you try to have a chat about how it is that you can help tone the language, tone the ideas, tone the ways in which these Republicans continue to agitate against their victims, add an insult to injury. How it is that you people can help tone those people down, because it doesn't suit anyone. All it does is it serves to wind people up. It serves to destroy the possibility of reconciliation at a future point if those people continue to add insult to the injury that they've already caused. Over to you, Kenny.
Yeah, Van, I think, John, you're entirely right. And the problem is that we've had words from people over the last quarter of a century when these things have happened, but there hasn't been any action.
Yeah.
And what we've saw successive politicians have to say, and indeed governments do, is ultimately pander when it comes to it. They don't have the backbone to stand up and to say enough is enough. And we've had a circumstance for a quarter of a century where, let's be honest, the rest of us have lowered the bar of decency to such a point that I'm not sure a 12-inch Pershing could now fit underneath it. It's got so close to the ground. So what we now must do is raise it up again and insist that these individuals, if they're going to be part of the political system, that there are certain actions and behaviours that will only be acceptable, and there's consequences for them if they don't adhere to it. We don't have anything of that. We had the blatant disregard for law over the period of COVID. For goodness sake, you have people making, the most painful of sacrifices right across the world around how they buried their dead. They had rows internally within their families around who could be present at funerals. No send-offs, no respect, none of that able to be done. And then you have full colour parties in terms of tourists. We have a circumstance where political people who are in office can stand dressed in terror regalia in the uniform of that organisation, and not a blink is made. That's not the sort of society, sure, that we want to be bringing up our children within. And this particular matter we're talking about tonight, and the future generations of our youngsters, rather than feeding them the same old nonsense of the history of the Troubles according to my dad, or the mope syndrome, the most oppressed people ever, we need to start talking with a level of honesty right across the board as to the wrongs that happened within this society, and try and pave a new way forward.
Kenny, before I move on to John, and we're moving on to the point where we're going to discuss Paul Kavanagh and the new position that he has in a certain body, I'm just going to pop up the picture, Kenny, and if you would like to set the context for why it is that John would be traumatized again today as a result of this man and the new position he's found himself in. Over to you, Kenny.
I think, and I can't get myself into John's space, because I mercifully have not been physically injured myself. I have witnessed things, yes, but it was not myself or my own flesh and blood. So all I can think is what I hear from other victims when they explain to me what it feels like, and they just feel that it's like somebody twisting a knife within their gut. It's a shudder. It's a feeling of sickness. It's a feeling of frustration and anger that a state can allow this to happen. They don't, in some ways, expect anything more from the terrorists and from those whom support them, but for it to get the sanction and agreement of the authorities to which they served, which they sought to hold democracy, that cannot be simple. And I don't even want to go there in terms of John. I'm sure the dreams, the nightmares, the recurrence of the PTSD around what happened on that day, all of that must be a factor in this. And I know what drives John is integrity and seeing this issue through to the end, where it is not the case that Paul Kavanagh can remain on an education authority, nor anyone else with serious criminal convictions. And that's what drives him, probably that adrenaline day and daily to keep at this. But if John was to sit back and not use his voice as he is doing so tonight, I'm sure, John, you would not be in a good way. You need to speak out.
Yeah. And John, again, setting the scene, not for the first time, just a few years ago, you were traumatized by the same man whenever he was given a job in the Stormont Assembly, whenever he became special advisor to Martin McGuinness. But without going back into that case, just tell us a bit about the recent occurrence. And if we, over to you, John, and if you just described the live chat, what it was that you found and how that it was that you felt.
Yeah, okay. With Paul Kavanagh, he seems to be the gift that just keeps on giving. For me, like Kenny quite rightly said, as well as the injuries that you can see, the dark clouds of PTSD, I think that's probably the worst thing that affects me. Now, I've got a wife, I've got children, I've got grandchildren. So as much as I possibly can, I don't let them see my dark clouds, my dark moods, and it consumes you in a way which is so individualist. You can't give it credit. You can't explain it. It's so bad. But with Paul Kavanagh, I don't want it to make it seem that I've got a big bee in my bonnet about this individual. I haven't. Paul Kavanagh is entitled to a job. I've got no problems with that whatsoever. If he's going to work for Sinn Féin, my friend, go and work for Sinn Féin. I've not got an issue with that. What I've got an issue with is Sinn Féin using this man as a political pawn. And what they're doing with Paul Kavanagh, and bless him, he's so silly, he doesn't seem to realise that every time they feed him out as a special advisor to Mark McGuinness, and every time they put him forward for these particular jobs, this is a man with 5 life sentences. 5. Not 1 life sentence, not 3 years, but 5 life sentences. He is, for want of a better word, a murderer. As well as that, he's a terrorist. He has inflicted so much pain and misery on so many families. It is immeasurable. So I don't understand how he can then, as a murderer, as a convicted terrorist, be given a position as on an education authority that makes policy and procedure for children. It can't be the case. Now, just in its basic format, we all have to go through DBS checks. So if we want a job in nursing or the police or the forces or in education, you have to have a DBS check. That DBS check, some things come up on it, it precludes you and prohibits you from certain jobs. So this man would never have passed a simple thing like a DBS check. But Sinn Féin don't care about policy, they don't care about procedure, they don't care about the law. They are a rule to themselves. So when this man is farmed out as a special advisor, and when he's farmed out on the education authority, that upsets people like me because I know what he is. Now, when you look at his picture, you think, oh, look at him. He looks like a congenial grandfather. The glasses and the beard, a little bit for like Father Christmas. He's anything but that. The man is a murderer, and he should not hold any position in any authority, in any government post or any education post.
And John, again, whenever you would have seen that short video clip that I put up there with the guy Shane Lavery, really explaining that it makes him cringe when he sees these young people standing alongside a coffin of an old man, and these people weren't even born whenever Northern Ireland Troubles was in full mode. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that, John?
Well, as I said, John, and I said to Kenny before, that this is the rewriting of history. Yeah. This is to fit the Sinn Féin IRA narrative that they are the pursuers of peace, and they're really not. So these young people, they are young, they're impressionable, and they will listen to one side of the story. But every story's got two sides. By all means, listen to the Sinn Féin side of the story, but equally, to make informed decisions, listen to our side of the story. Now, Kenny will tell you, we've met many, many, many times. I've asked Paul Kavanagh to meet me. It could be done by Zoom, in any way he wants, because I would like to understand what makes this particular person tick. What makes him think that at 18 he can justifiably go around with a firearm ready? He's going equipped. He's going equipped to kill. What makes him do that? What makes him think that it's appropriate to plant bombs and see kids and see children and see families and still activate that device? Because anybody with a modicum of humanity wouldn't do that. So, and don't give me that we want an independent Ireland by any means and all means. I'm not Irish. I was in the Irish Guards. I represented the people of Ireland. Every time I put that uniform on, every time I went to do a job, I represented the people of Ireland. And it's something that I was really, really proud to do. And I would still do. And I would hopefully that yourself, John, and you, Kenny, and me, and other people like us, we can still represent the good, decent people of Ireland. And that's what drives me. And people like, and it doesn't have to be Paul Kavanagh. It could be anybody, any terrorist. I would stand up and say, this is not right. And we have to make that stand.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me, John, is the way that you put that is that, you don't begrudge this man having a job. But again, it's the story that we hear all so often, Kenny. It's where victims, real life victims, as I say, they really just want to be left alone. They don't want to be re-traumatized by these people. And as I said earlier, it's a psychological war. And they calculate putting the likes of Mr. Kavanagh into these positions in order to really ratchet things up and wind people up and see how far that it is that they can go. Kenny, again, thank you very much for coming on. And John, I really thank you for coming on. And at this point, what I would like to do is I would like to just go around the screen. We're coming to a close. And I would like to ask the live chat to please leave your messages for John in order that John can see the messages after. I mean, John will watch this back. And, just thank John for coming on. And I thank each and every one for coming and joining with us this Monday evening. And there's more to come. There's more to come. Next week, we tell the story it's a powerful story. It's a story that would bring a tear to anyone's eye of a lady who lost her daughter in the Shankill bomb, and what a story it is. And we'll be putting up an advertisement. A lady called Gina Murray and her son Gary Murray will be on her stream with myself and Kenny next Monday evening. So mark that date in your calendar. And again, thank you very much for coming along and joining us. So again, we'll go around the screen and you can say your goodbyes. So Kenny, over to you. And again, thank you for coming on. If you'd just like to address the live chat before we go.
Okay, well, just once again, big thank you to everybody who has checked in this evening. You're in the presence of a legend in John Radley. He is a guy who's been across Northern Ireland on a number of occasions. Sad in a way, John, the reason why you had to come across in the first instance, but I know that he's loved very much within our safe family, but also much wider than that. He's respected, and people do see him as someone who has a strength, who has been prepared not to take what's happened and to stand by the truth. And we just encourage more and more people within the Victims and Survivors fraternity to do so, because we can't allow these issues to any longer be passed up to politicians or anyone else for that matter. to church leaders or others. These issues must be dealt with by victims and survivors themselves. They shouldn't have to, but there is no other option at this stage. And John, just a pleasure to know you, and I do hope and pray. I know that it's important to say as well, John, to give some encouragement, that the Education Minister has indicated in recent days that he intends to bring forward legislation, which would mean that it would be an inability for Paul Kavanagh or anyone else with serious criminal convictions to serve on the Education Authority. We watch with interest to see how that develops. We are calling on political parties across the spectrum in Northern Ireland to get behind this initiative, as many of them did when the law was brought in around special advisors. So I know, John, that leaving tonight, you would want to say that to the political parties across the board, to stand by you, stand by others like you, and to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Over to you, John.
Yeah, John, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity and this platform. I appreciate it. And like I say, I can speak on behalf of many, many, many thousands of veterans and other victims to thank you expressly. Kenny, it's been a pleasure to have your support and your ongoing support. Without you, I wouldn't have the voice, I wouldn't have the platform, I wouldn't have the opportunity to do this. What I would like to say, my message to the political leaders of all parties right across the spectrum, to the media, to the mainstream media, sooner or later, you've got to stop ignoring us. Sooner or later, you've got to stop paying us lip service, saying you will do something, and then ultimately you don't do something. You slip back into the shadows because you feel that the Northern Ireland conflict, the Northern Ireland situation politically might be political suicide for you. Well, people like people who stand up and be counted. I'm happy to stand up. I'm happy to put my head above the parapet. I'm happy to take all the incoming flack. Nobody gets this good looking by not doing it. So I'm happy to do that. So political parties, mainstream media, get behind me, get behind John, get behind Kenny, get behind the many, many, many hundreds of thousands of veterans that served with distinction on Op Banner and who are still being persecuted and prosecuted by some factions in Northern Ireland. We don't deserve it. We're here to protect and to serve.
And John, once again, thank you very much for coming on. Thank you, Kenny. And John, if you would, look at the live chat afterwards. I've just been keeping my eye on it there, and there's many, many messages of support and many, many messages thanking you for coming on and sharing your story. And again, here at Forgotten Voices Media, what are we? We are a platform that aims to tell the stories in the way that they actually happen, and cutting through and going above and pushing beyond this rewriting of history, which is also prevalent today, even within the mainstream media. I mean, just if you look back recently, we have people like Peter Taylor, who was around in the early days of our troubles, who worked for the BBC, who said that he would have joined the IRA if he had been living in Londonderry in around 1972. And people like Darragh McIntyre, which painted Martin McGuinness as a Che Guevara type person, some sort of folk hero when he was handing young kids guns and putting a bomb in a boot whenever that footage came around. And other people like John Sweeney, who were all from the Panorama stable, who again had said that Martin McGuinness was his hero. So again, that's the type of journalism that we've been having ever since the days that the Troubles started. And why do we exist here at Forgotten Voices Media? We exist because that we want to tell the truth. We want to tell the real truth. We want to scratch the surface with people like John and people like Shane and other people that we've had on our screen. So again, I'm appealing to the people, our politicians, and even the politicians in the Irish Republic. We all should have a vested interest in ensuring that people aren't agitated against in order that these people, all they want to do is they just want to get on with their lives, and they should be permitted to get on with their lives without psychological terrorism being part of their everyday life and at the hands of the organisation that actually made them victims in the first place. So again, thank you very much for everyone coming along. And again, I'm appealing to, if there's anyone out there that can reach into the Irish, into the Dáil. And I think, Kenny, that's the conversation that we really need to have, because I believe that, the British government can't do this, because all they would do is they would pour fuel on the fire. But I believe that the conglomerate which is in the Dáil right now, surely they could get together and they could insist that not in our name, not under our flag, that should you be winding up and add an insult to the injuries that, of the victims that you created, that you people created, that your organisation created in the first place. So look, thank you very much for coming along. And it's
John, if I could just say there, sorry, that just as you spoke a number of weeks ago, we did have a young man on the programme in David Kelly. And David Kelly's father was a member of the legitimate Uglan na HÉireann. And he gave his life for Ireland. He gave his life for the people of that place. He needs to be lifted up within that society, and not those other individuals whom actually murdered his father and others like him. So, people need to recalibrate their thinking around all of this, and they understand what's legitimate and what was criminal and terrorist.
Yeah, and that's a definite. So look, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play us out. So don't go anywhere, Kenny and John. We'd like to have a chat with you when the stream's ended.
Okay.
I would just like to finish, Kenny, on the back of what you just said there, and we'll show people who David Kelly was. And then what we'll do is we'll play ourselves out with the Irish, the pipes and drums of the Irish Guards again.
Can't get any better.
Good stuff. See, John was an Irish Guard, and that's what we'll do. So, firstly, David Kelly, and then we'll move on to the Irish Guards, and then that's the end. So thanks very much for everyone for coming along. And whilst we play some of these little video clips, and especially the Irish Guards, I'll pop up some of the comments on the screen for David to see. Thanks very much for coming along. You're a victim, a real life victim. You probably are traumatized and re-traumatized by some of the actions of these people even today, and their lack of remorse, I guess, for what had happened. I mean, David, what exactly are you fighting for? Is it truth? Is it justice?
Well, I guess I would have, see, as a reaction to what happened to us, me and my family, my mother and my younger brothers, we all moved to London. So we were sort of out of the picture in our formative years. But I returned as a young man, and I looked around and said, who killed my father, and how is my father being remembered, or is he just going to be forgotten completely? A footnote in the history books. And then as I made more and more inquiries into what happened to my father, I was saying someone should be held to account, and I was thinking along the lines of, yes, someone in a court of law being found guilty. So, that's where I would have been coming from. In more recent years, like it's 37 years this year since it happened, I'm not so much interested in someone serving a prison sentence, to be honest, at this stage. But it's more just to have someone held accountable in some form, whether it's in a criminal or civil court, or there's a public inquiry. I know there's other methods like coroner's court and so forth. It's just to have someone held to account, so it should be remembered in the history books of what actually happened on that day, and there could be no muddying of the waters. I mean, for years, what I call the Provisional Republican Movement, which includes Sinn Féin, would have spread the malicious rumours that my father was actually killed in a friendly fire incident, and it was all covered up by the authorities. So that's a constant lie I've had to deal with for years. So that's where I'm at. It's just getting that truth out there. I reckon the sacrifice my father made, so that we don't have we don't get to a point where you have elected TDs walking around Dáil Éireann actually saying that the Provisional IRA armed struggle was legitimate and nobody actually countering them. I'm here to say, hold on, what about my father and the young Garda and the others who were killed, the other members of the Irish security forces and civilians? Their lives mattered. And you'd be spitting on their graves if you don't stand up and speak on their behalf. when these people make their ludicrous claims. The Army, in collaboration with the council, put up a lovely memorial plaque for my father, a memorial stone, I should say, and it's lovely. But only a short distance away is a memorial to an IRA hunger striker, Kieran Hertzon. So every time I stand and admire my father's stone, but then only a matter of yards away is a memorial stone to a man from the organisation that murdered my father. So, like, I'm reminded every time I see that. I'm also reminded, like last year, I had the president of Sinn Féin. She said the legitimate armed struggle was justified, and that if she had been a bit older and had lived in Northern Ireland, she would have joined up as a volunteer. And for me to hear a leading Irish politician say that was re-traumatizing for me.